Comrades and friends, good evening. It's a great pleasure to be with you here this evening to celebrate the 92nd anniversary of the Great Socialist Soviet October Revolution. It's actually 92 years to the day today that the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, initiated their armed insurrection from the Smolny in St. Petersburg, Leningrad as it subsequently became, that initiated that glorious event that ushered in an entire new historical epoch, the epoch of socialism. And it's a good time, therefore, to reflect not only upon the achievements of October, but the lessons it still holds for us, as some of our other speakers have done tonight. There are still people who talk of revolution in Britain, more still who talk of socialism, but very few left who understand it as Lenin and the Bolsheviks understood it. There are lamentably few who understand that as long as the economic system of capitalism survives, as long as it limps on from crisis to crisis, it can do nothing but heap misery upon the working people of Britain and the wider world. There are lamentably few who understand that socialism means nothing if it is not designed to take power and put it in the hands of working people, to elevate and educate working people, to equip them with the knowledge and the skills necessary to become the ruling class. We've always said the working class are the ruling class in waiting, but it's only through mass participation in the struggle that equips them with those skills that they can really take their destiny into their own hands. And it's only the working people who can solve their problems. No one else can do it for them. We've long said that working people do not need to be the recipients or the beneficiaries of other people's charity. We need no condescending saviours to save us from their banquet halls, are the words of the Internationale that we'll close the meeting with. No, what we need and what we demand are an end to economic exploitation of workers by the capitalists and of the so-called third world nations by imperialist nations. We need and demand an end to political and physical oppression of workers by capitalists and their state forces. Given these conditions, the workers are more than capable of creating a decent, secure, prosperous, cultured and meaningful life for all humanity. We need and demand, therefore, an end to neo-colonial oppression as our comrades from third world countries, so-called, from neo-colonial countries, from countries which have felt the oppression of our own ruling class, come here and represent the cutting edge of anti-imperialist struggle, and it's a great pleasure and honour to listen to them and to have them speak with us tonight. We must say now, our nation, our country has no right to go around the world appointing its client states to do its bidding to facilitate us looting other countries' resources. We want no part in that. So we demand an end to the foul, bloody acts of murder that our ruling class and the US ruling class, Japanese ruling class, the European Union perpetrates to back up that system of exploitation. An end to the clandestine assassinations of the leaders of progressive peoples around the world. And I remember particularly people thinking just of the Congo, of Patrice Lumumba at the beginning of their struggle, of Laurent Kabila at the end of their struggle, of Chris Hani in South Africa, how different the history of South Africa could have been had we been left the flower of our revolutionary leadership, of Bhagat Singh, of course, in India, and so many countless more, you can't name them all. In Latin America, in Palestine, all over the world. We demand an end to the incessant and mercenary war waged by the marauding and despoiling armies of imperialism that characterizes entire history to the present day. And again, you can pretty much name any country in the world that we've been involved in. George Galloway spoke to us a little while ago and told us of his grandfather who pointed out that 2/3 of the world was painted pink. This is the legacy of British imperialism. The sun never set, he said, on the British Empire. And he said his grandfather was Irish. He said, of course, God wouldn't trust the British in the dark. Ireland is an obvious example of a country where Britain has a long colonial history, but there are many more. China, Malaysia, Korea, Vietnam, Nepal, Afghanistan, South America. And many of these struggles ongoing today. And we must be prepared to bring about these changes by any means necessary. And in this regard, the October Revolution, the trail blazed by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, has shown that working people are capable of taking their own destiny into their own hands, and they're capable of making a new future for themselves. So we need, in short, mass participation in a revolutionary movement, capable of remoulding the working class so that they're capable of taking power. We need working people to wield this power of a new kind for the collective benefit of humanity. The government that the October Revolution brought into force was a government of a new kind. It was a state of a new kind. It was at once a state and not a state. It was the system of rule of a class, but it was a class that now was the working people as a whole, the working class and the peasantry united. And therefore, it didn't need a special apparatus for the suppression of the majority. It was the armed majority, suppressing only the former ruling class. It was in fact the masses armed, educated and organised politically and militarily to defend their own interests. And this is just what we're talking about when we talk about a revolutionary movement. The Soviet government was a revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the working class, to use Lenin's profound expression. It is a state that had both executive and legislative power in the same body. It was a state that was directly elected by working people, scrutinised by them. They were subject to recall at any time, and they were expected to live on the wages of ordinary working people. And this is the way to combat the bureaucracy that we see in the ruling bodies that so typifies our current bourgeois mother of parliaments and all the corruption that we've seen it mired in. Of course, it's deliberate in the case of our own governments. Our governments are not designed to working people. Our democracy is a facade. They're there to pull the wool over the eyes of working people, not really to represent us. But it's not, of course, just the government. As Zain has pointed out, even workers' organisations, even unions, their leaders sometimes, and as a rule, there are honourable exceptions, have such elevated standards of life, elevated conditions of life, that they cease to have sympathy and cease to represent workers in struggle. And we must demand that they live as normal workers do, and they think as normal workers do, they act as normal workers do, and they represent us if they are to continue to claim to be representatives of workers in struggle. Only power in the hands of working people will enable us to use the wealth that we create through our labour to solve our pressing needs. Lenin, commenting in 1918 on the influence of the USSR upon the proletarians of all countries, had this to say, and I'll read it to you because it's lovely. He said, "The example of the Soviet Republic will stand before them for a long time to come. Our Socialist Republic of Soviets will stand secure as a torch of international socialism and as example to the labouring masses. Over there, over here, conflict, war, bloodshed, the sacrifice of millions of lives, capitalist exploitation. Here, in the Soviet Union, a genuine policy of peace and a socialist republic of Soviets." And until, sadly and lamentably, it was overturned by Khrushchevite revisionists, there can be no doubt about the truth of those profound words. I don't want to go too extensively over the list of the Soviet Union's achievements, so many of our speakers have spoken them to you before, but I'll enumerate them very briefly, if I may. In place of destructive crisis of capitalism, there was brought forth a socialist planned economy, which dedicated itself not to satisfying the greed of a tiny minority, but to actually satisfying the living standards, the desperate needs of the vast masses of humanity. In place of crisis, there was harmony in production. Socialism transformed Russia. Tsarist Russia was a notorious prison camp of nations, in which the Tsarists, as the imperialist force, though their territories were contiguous to them in territory, you think of the whole of the Soviet Union as Russia, that's by no means the case. Russia was the imperialist country. The territories, so many of them now have become independent, but Kazakhstan, Ukraine, all of these countries, they were essentially colonies. They were ground down, oppressed, didn't have rights in terms of their language, didn't have rights in terms of organisation, didn't have rights in terms of their culture, and history was suppressed. Some of them didn't even have their own scripts until the Soviet Revolution came and gave rise, in place of this prison of nations, it gave rise to a brotherhood of nations. And again, I'm going to read a tiny excerpt from Palm Dutt, who in his book described this phenomenon. He's talking about, particularly about pogroms, which were a feature of dying Tsarist Russia, of a dying class trying to incite enmity and fratricidal warfare amongst working people. But that all disappeared after the advent of the Soviet Union, and Palmdutt says that this proves that there is no natural, inevitable difficulty from the cohabitation of different races or religions in one country. The differences, these difficulties arise from social and political conditions. They arise in particular wherever a reactionary regime is endeavouring to maintain itself against the popular movement, and they are the surest sign of the impending downfall of that regime.